Sorry?
Do you want to be the next councillor of North York?
No. But I vote for you.
Our second esteemed speaker today, of course, is Professor Nelson Wiseman. Professor Wiseman has extensively researched the history of the Manitoba CCF NDP, examined the state-owned enterprises in Canada, and has created a broad interpretive framework for the history of social democracy in Canada. He is also very well known for his research on Canadian political culture that explains the reasons for the success of social democracy in some Canadian provinces and the failure of social democratic parties in other provinces. He is currently an associate professor of political science at the University of Toronto and did his BA at the University of Manitoba, completed his master's and PhD at the University of Toronto. He specializes in Canadian government, political parties and leaders, and provincial politics, as well as frequently providing political commentary for several media outlets. His CV is obviously incredibly extensive, but for those of you who are interested, just to note a few of Professor Wiseman's most recent publications. One can talk about the Public Intellectual in Canada, that being one title, the other one, In Search of Canadian Political Culture, and also, I suppose the one that's very well known is Dead End, Conservatism and the Conservative Party. So, Professor Wiseman, thank you very much. We're looking very much forward to listening to your remarks.
I'm not sure you should clap. You might not like what I say. I'm very conscious of the fact that, first, I want to thank you for inviting me, and I want to congratulate you for coming out. It's a comment on your public spiritedness. I'm very conscious of the fact that I don't live in this constituency, and it's a constituency town hall. And I know Peter Russel also lives downtown, and I take it Dave does. Well, he doesn't live in North York anymore. So, may I begin by asking the question, how many people here do not live in the constituency? Oh, so it's about half. Okay. And the reason I ask that question is because meetings such as this about electoral reform, I often find, are not representative of the community that's holding it. And let me give you just some evidence, because this isn't the first time in this province or in this city that we've been looking at electoral reform. 10 years ago, you might recall, we went to the polls in Ontario, and not only were we voting for a government, we were asked if we wanted to change the electoral system to mixed member proportional. And why were we voting on that? Because the government said that it would have a proposal, there would be a referendum, and it created what was called a Citizens' Assembly that traveled across the province to find out what people thought. They held 29 meetings in 17 cities. The largest attendance was about 200 people, and that was in Toronto. So this is quite a good turnout because this is just one constituency. And the smallest turnout was in Dryden, about 7 people. Now, the overwhelm, and they also received over 900 briefs. Only 8% of the briefs were opposed to changing, were opposed to changing the electoral system. Only 8%. So the Citizens' Assembly, having heard what people said, voted 94 to 8. I think that was the number. There were 103 people should have been on, but I guess one didn't vote, in favor of proposing what seemed to be the most popular mixed member proportional. So we had a vote on it. So, you know, at the Citizens' Assembly, at the town hall meetings, people want to change. What happened in the vote? Only 37% voted in favor of change. So how representative were these meetings? How representative, how much in touch was the Citizens' Assembly with actually what people were thinking? you know, one of the things Dave said is he thinks maybe we should have, incidentally, I agree, I don't think first past the post is a very good system. It obviously causes great distortions. Let me give you a real extreme example. It's true someone got elected here in Toronto with 17% of the vote, and I used that example in class. Let's just look back to the 1993 election to which Dave referred to. In that election, the Conservatives got 2.2 million votes. The Liberals got 5.6 million votes, substantially more. But the Conservatives, as Dave pointed out, only elected 2 people. That meant for every 1.1 million people in this country that voted Conservative, they just won 1 seat. In contrast, the Liberals, for every 37,000 people that voted Liberal, they got 1 seat. That's 1.1 million versus 37,000. That doesn't seem fair. Now, there are issues with proportionality. And that is, one of the principles we saw on the board is local representation. And people are concerned that they have a tie to their local MP. And this is especially the case when you get into outlying rural areas and small towns. They don't want to be lumped together in some huge constituency that might go, you know, stretch hundreds of miles. We are a very large country. So I think we need to differentiate between what goes on in cities and what goes on in the rest of the country. And the idea that, you know, I know Canada is the only one that exclusively uses first past the post. In the US, I think San Francisco uses it municipally and so on. But one of the things I want to remind people, because, you know, it's been a while, is actually we have used alternative voting systems in this country. Most provinces have had multi-member constituencies. Newfoundland used to elect people on the basis of their religious backgrounds. We had a religious denominational basis of representation well into the 60s. A system that I'm fairly familiar with, and which I think worked very well in Manitoba and in Alberta between the 20s and the 50s, was that you had the ranked ballot in rural areas, but in the larger cities, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, you had this single transferable vote, which was preferential ballot, but a number of people got elected. And the reason I say I think that makes sense is, okay, a lot of people here might not be from Willowdale, but I suspect everybody here is from the GTA or from Toronto, the city of Toronto. And so the issues that we have in the city are fairly similar. Transportation, gridlock, social housing, garbage pickup, whatever concerns you municipally. But the issues in a riding like, you know, Kenora are going to be very different than the issues in a riding like even Timmins, or something in the eastern part of the province, like Pembroke. So that's a fundamental difference, and I think having a single transferable vote in the city allows us, let us say in Toronto, I don't know how many MPs we have now, maybe 20, 25, to elect 25 people in the city that represent the city, and then the rural and outlying areas would have their own representation. I too don't favor mandatory voting. I believe in choice. But I am against online voting. Please cut me off after my 10 minutes. Because I think the issue here is security. Actually, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about people selling their votes. I don't think much of that will happen. And I don't think much of it happened before we had these stringent voter ID rules. I think the problem is the system can be hacked. You know, it was 3 years ago that we learned that 3 federal government departments were hacked, and we don't even know how extensive it was and what information was stolen. Does a day or a week go by where systems haven't been hacked? The University of Western Ontario conducted its election online, and then they discovered the results were hacked, and they had to cancel them. Will it increase voter turnout? Well, at the University of Toronto, Voter turnout was 15% in student elections. So the students, very tech savvy, I'm not, I don't even have a cell phone, decided we're going to have online voting. That'll increase participation. Voter turnout stayed at 15%. Markham adopted online voting. Voter turnout had been 27%. It went up to 30%. Is it because of the online voting? I don't know. After all, we didn't have it in this last election, and as Ali pointed out, voter turnout went up from 61% to just under 69%. I think there's something nice and social. It's something we share as a community when we go out to vote. It's something we're sharing right here. Why have the town hall? Why not just, you know, send in your vote online about what you think? I have a lot of prepared comments and I haven't gotten to them. Now, there are a lot of attractions to proportionality, proportional system. It promises to distort can distortions that are caused by the current system. And incidentally, proportionality is one of the guiding principles that the courts use in dealing with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The ranked ballot, which I don't oppose either, also has limitations because, yes, someone can get 40%, but a party could get 40% in every single constituency and not win a single seat because none of the other 60% decide to select that party as their second choice. So, as Dave said, no system is perfect, and if there were a perfect system, every country would gravitate toward it. Are alternative voting systems complicated? I don't think they are. I think it's very simple. Going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is not complicated. If David Letterman can do it, we can do it.
He went to 10, didn't he?
He went to 10. Well, you can vote up to 10. In Winnipeg's election, the first time they used a single transferable vote in the city, 40 people ran for 10 seats. So that ballot had 40 names on it. And you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 40. It doesn't mean you have to go all the way to 40. The communists would tell their supporters, plump. In other words, just vote for the 2, 3 communists, 1, 2, 3. Don't vote for anybody else. So there won't be a possibility of us helping somebody else win. I was going to talk about, well, should we have a referendum on this issue? I don't think so. I think it's a dreadful idea. And the reason I think it, for a few reasons. First off, we have elections. I'm a Burkean. I believe we elect people to make decisions. And if we don't like the decisions they make, we'll let them know at the next election. And I also don't believe that, oh, you know, if we adopt this system, it'll help the Liberal Party, the ranked ballot, because Trudeau wants it, Conservatives don't. If we select this system, you know, it'll help the NDP or the Greens because of this. I don't buy that at all. If people are really opposed to the system that you've created, they'll vote against you, whatever system you put out there for them. And I think a lot of these calculations, these assumptions about what the vote will turn out, what the results of the election will be, are simply speculative. I noticed after we had a redistribution of seats, we had added seats, most of them were in the suburbs. Oh, I got all these calls from the media saying, obviously this is going to help the Conservatives because they're strong in the suburbs. Well, what I noticed in this last election is those suburban seats went overwhelmingly Liberal. So much, you know, for that prognostication. And you can often change a system thinking it's going to help you, and it'll hurt you. Let me give you an example. In the 1930s, when the CCF was created, now the NDP, they were very competitive in British Columbia. they were so competitive, each party was getting about a third of the vote. I think the Liberals were getting more. And if the Liberals and Conservatives were so worried that the CCF would form the government that they formed a coalition government to make sure that the CCF, with its 30, 33, 34% of the vote, would not win the election because it was first past the post and they could squeeze through. So they had that system for 1941 to 1952. Then the Liberals and Conservatives started to fight over cabinet seats. Their federal parties wanted to disentangle them because it gave the CCF federally the line, hey, Conservatives and Liberals, they're in bed together, they stand for the same things. We're the only alternative party. So the Liberals and Conservatives in British Columbia were now, okay, we're going to get a divorce, but we don't want the CCF to win. So they said, okay, what can we do? Well, we'll get the transferable ballot. Because if you're a Liberal, you'll vote for us Liberals first, then you vote for a Conservative second. But you won't vote for the CCF. And if you're a Conservative, you'll vote Conservative first, then you vote for a Liberal second. So this way, for sure the CCF is going to get squeezed out. Well, what happened in the election? Well, out of nowhere, this other party arises called Social Credit, which became the second choice of a huge percentage of the population. And overnight, Social Credit went from having no seats to forming the government. What happened to the Liberals and Conservatives? The Liberals were shut out of government for the next 40 years. The Conservatives have just completely disappeared in British Columbia because of that one election in 1952. So don't think you can predict what will happen with a different electoral system. Why else don't I think, well, let me end on this. Why else don't I think a referendum would work? First, let me point out that the overwhelming majority of Canadians are detached from this issue. They may tell you they want a referendum, but will they actually go out and vote? Let me share some polling numbers with you. On Friday, Ipsos released a poll saying that only 3% of the public are following what this committee studying electoral reform is doing. And the majority of that very small group are people like myself, white, older men. 81% of the Canadian public, it says, are unaware that the government is even consulting citizens on this issue. But do you want a referendum on it? Yeah, 55% want a referendum. In May, 73%, according to Ipsos, wanted a referendum. In July, according to Forum Research, 65% wanted a referendum. What's my point? Go find a question put to the public in which they're asked, would you like a referendum on it? And they say, no, I don't want a referendum. So you'll get a response, people want a referendum, but they're not interested in the issue, they're detached from the issue, and I don't think they'll show up. Let me give you some evidence. The province in Canada that has the highest voter turnout consistently is Prince Edward Island. It consistently hovers around 80%. It was more than 80% in the last election. Now, we've had now 3 referendums in the country on changing the electoral system. We had one, oh, we've had 4. We had one in Ontario, we had 2 in BC, and we had one in Prince Edward Island. Now, in Ontario, and in BC, the referendum took place during the election. So when you got there, you got a ballot to vote. It's interesting, in Ontario, 138,000 fewer ballots were cast in the referendum than in the election. Because a lot of people were surprised when they got there that there was even a vote on this and they had no idea what it was about. Was it a driving issue in the election? John Tory, who was the Conservative leader in 2007, said in all this traveling around the province, only 3 people raised the issue of the electoral system. There were all these polls before every election. What do Canadians care about in the election? You know, you get health care, you get taxes, you get unemployment, you get the environment. I haven't seen a poll where electoral reform comes out to 1%. I don't see it. So I think it'll cost over $300 million. I think it'll be unnecessarily trooping people to the polls who will become more cynical about the political system, saying, didn't we just have an election? Isn't that what I voted for Ali about? If I cared about electoral reform, his platform told me this was going to be the last election. We're not going to of the current system. So, and if I don't like it, I'll vote against them the next time. So I don't think we should have a referendum. And if we do have a referendum, if we redistribute seats, depending on which system you want to go for, the system I'm proposing wouldn't require redistributing seats. It would require clustering the seats in a city like Toronto into one large constituency and having still all the single-member constituencies elsewhere with a ranked ballot. But if we do redistribute seats for something, I don't know, like mixed member proportional, because we don't want 680 members in the House. It might mean, according to Elections Canada, it would take at least 26 months to do that. Well, if it takes at least 26 months, hey, it's almost 2017. We're told this is going to be the last election, the one we had last year. And we've got an election coming up in 2019. If we do have a referendum, why does Elections Canada need at least 6 months to prepare, as it says? I noticed last year in Greece, they called a referendum on June the 27th, and they voted on July the 5th. Nobody thought the results were undemocratic. Okay, I've gone on too long. I beg your pardon?
Prince Edward Island. You didn't finish the story.
Oh yeah, Prince Edward Island had a standalone referendum. Prince Edward Island, where the turnouts are 80%, 35% voted. Also, New Zealand, which has had voter turnouts between 84 and 98%, switched to mixed member proportional 5 elections ago. I don't think there's any problem. They've had 4 elections since. In only one of those elections has voter turnout hit 80%. So I don't think there's a relationship between voter turnout and electoral system either. There are many other factors that are involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Weisman. Obviously, 10 minutes is very, very short. So I just thought I would share with you that, as you know, there is an all-party committee that is traveling around the country and asking Canadians what they think of electoral reform. You'll be happy to know that Professor Wiseman and Professor Russel have both appeared before the committee. And I would certainly encourage you to actually read the transcripts of that committee, because you'll obviously get a much better sense as to what their priorities are. Now, last but certainly not least, Professor Russel.